Okay, hello guys, and welcome back to Relevant Founders, brought to you by Relevant Software. Today, we have a really interesting guest with us, Dan Macgregor, co-founder at Nexxiot. Just to give you guys a little bit of a background of what Nexxiot is, I'm just going to say a little bit, and then we're going to go straight in for Daniel to explain better, much more efficient than I will be at this, Daniel. So basically, Nexxiot is the independent enabler of digitized supply chain and offers a complete IoT solution with sensors and software for data analysts, leveraging their expertise in industrial IoT to deliver unprecedented visibility to rail cargo supply chains and asset fleets, making efficient management as seamless and as effortless as possible. So Daniel, I'm sure you'll be able to correct me a little bit there and give me a little bit more context what you do at Nexxiot. So what I'm really interested in first, tell us a bit about Nexxiot and what is it that you do at Nexxiot?
Yeah, so thanks very much for having me on the show, Matt. And I'd like to maybe sort of frame it a little bit in terms of our history. At Nexxiot, we're creating digital supply chain solutions. I realized quite some time ago, that even 35 years ago, GPS has been around, but why is it not being used extensively on mobile assets that are valuable and cargo that's traveling around the world? And we're actually solving these problems by creating a hardware solution, but also this is very much the enabler to create value through data. So it's essential to equip assets and objects that are moving, that are valuable, that are interesting for whatever reason to different stakeholders with a piece of hardware. And if you think about it like this, it's quite interesting. At Silicon Valley, the word silicon from Silicon Valley is about wafers, the chips, the silicon chips. And Silicon Valley grew up creating hardware. So Microsoft and IBM and these companies became legends in their fields because they created desktop computers in the case of Microsoft and servers and infrastructure in the case of IBM. And then Microsoft sold those desktop computers to every university and school and every business and every home. And then they sold Windows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 until everybody got bored and switched to iOS. So, we've kind of had this as a precedent in that, there needs to be a hardware layer to create value from software. But then it became uncool. So, 15, 20 years ago, Silicon Valley stopped making hardware, started focusing on asset-light investments, which is app development. The story was that the computing has come of age, the internet is here, and now we build apps. But actually, the internet's done very well at connecting humans to humans. So, we've seen the beginning, the first coders were sending a bit of code to impress their friends, and then email arrived, and then websites and shop fronts online. And then, it moved into, enterprise applications like SAP and things, all cloud-based software type products. But actually, I believe that hardware is still bringing value to the software by providing unique data that's needed in order to provide digital services to the different stakeholders that need it.
Absolutely. So, okay, so founded in 2015, if I'm correct. Yeah,
correct, yeah.
You founded. Obviously, there's been quite a lot in the industry, in life that's happened since 2015. What have been the challenges over the last kind of, 7, 8 years since it was founded? What have been the challenges which you have faced from that kind of idea of, right, we need to do something with this to now?
So I think obviously, understanding the needs of the market. A little bit of this question, if the Henry Ford story, he asked people what they wanted and they said a faster horse. People couldn't imagine necessarily, his future customers weren't able to imagine, a metal chassis with a combustion engine strapped on and a braking system and a steering mechanism, because Henry Ford needed to bring them the available motor car. So, if we went to our customers in those early days and we said to them, what's not working in the supply chain, or what's broken in your operations, maybe it's a shipping line with 1 million or 2 million shipping containers, and they're doing the heavy lifting, they're transferring value around the world for their customers, and they're creating value by doing that heavy lifting. But if you said to them what's not working, they'd say, well, it's working actually, everything's fine, we've got everything we need, this is our industry, this is how it is. And actually, to make that connection in terms of saying, well, maybe there's another way to do this. Maybe there's something, in terms of using data that would be, bringing more value to your customers and to different stakeholders, or even creating the chance for you to innovate and, either outpace your competitors or disrupt your competitors with new business models and so on. So that was the first thing, maybe, as that, how do you close the gap in terms of, what's needed and what we can provide. But then also in terms of, the usual challenges of creating a startup or, a new company is raising money, creating a brand, dealing with, sort of the growth pains, the politics and so on involved of, shareholders' needs and, different people who join the company and, trying to manage a progress that's at maximum speed with minimum resources, and to actually lock into what the market needs.
With many startups, the need to pivot, the need to pivot there is all the time.
Constantly pivoting, especially the first 2 years, a ridiculous pace. Sometimes it was like 3 pivots a day in the first 2 years. So before we founded the company, actually, we did a lot of our pivoting. So we were coming up with a theory, and I was making 100 phone calls a day. My background is as a headhunter. So, I'm quite used to making lots of outgoing cold calls, and was able to get quickly to the juicy bits and understand what the clients need and understand who our clients could be, because you have all these different stakeholders through the global value network of the supply chain, and everybody could be a customer if you have unique data and value.
Absolutely. So there's a few things that I want to pick out there. So basically, obviously, the need for pivoting is so important for most startups. We've obviously, since 2015, there have been challenges. Obviously, we've had COVID and things like this, which have affected most businesses. Obviously, your business, in a certain way, your business was really important for something like COVID. Could have been, this kind of understanding of IoT and supply chain, because the need to transfer logistically, the medicine from one place to the other, making sure the temperature is controlled. Have you recently had to make any kind of pivots, or were the pivots really only at the start of building a startup?
No, we're pivoting all the time. And, I think this is something that is ongoing. As you learn things, then you change things. And it's a very intuitive process. And you have to obviously leave your ego at the door at the very beginning of this process, because a lot of the time, you maybe work on, just take a simple example, like an early brochure that you kind of try to communicate your value proposition through, or a pitch deck for investors or something like this. You go to a meeting with this thing that you've worked on for 2 weeks or 2 months, and then you have an incredible discovery. Somebody says something to you, criticism often, and you can do 2 things with that information. You can say, well, they don't know what they're talking about, we keep going, or you can integrate that new information into and you can pivot as a result. I think you have to be careful not to pivot for the sake of it. You have to make sure that you're pivoting for the right reasons and when you have qualified information in your hands. But in the case of COVID accelerated our business, because the world woke up to the needs of this data, to the value of this data. I think and two, maybe because we did so much tough, brutal self-analysis and pivoting in the early days, we got ourselves onto a good track early, and there were kind of more micro pivots. But in a way, if you read, we use this book quite heavily. I'm not plugging it. I don't know the guy, but this book here is Lean B2B. And, this is how to pivot. This is how to do an MVP for a B2B business. And then the other one is the business model generation, which is great because, it makes you rethink. We're using the business model canvas. It makes you rethink the flow of value and who your customer and, who your client is. And if you can, enable one potential client or stakeholder group to do something and they become your partner, how does that change the business? So you're constantly evolving and realizing some new possibilities and trying them on for size. And you have to be extremely, I'd say one of the things that I've learned is to be not fixated on specific outcomes, but to push a positive trend and to try to understand that we are a work in progress always, because the client's understanding and knowledge is evolving as we evolve, and therefore their needs are changing.
Tell me a little bit about your approach to your MVP development. How did it look from the beginning?
Well, in a way, we were very naive, and this is, to be honest, advantageous if you're prepared to learn and not take things to heart. So initially, we're thinking, okay, it comes down to this question. When I looked at the world and I was trying to think about Internet of Things, it's the Internet of everything, but you've got to start somewhere. Okay, so you start with something that you perceive to be valuable that is currently not monitored. And I was thinking always about the supply chain, because for me, the value of the supply chain, or the value in the supply chain, is very intangible. We're taking things, raw materials out of the ground. Maybe it's coal or oil, or in other senses we're dealing with grain for food, or we're dealing with forestry products for construction. And no matter what we think, or no matter what how we like to portray the world to ourselves, we're still reliant on those things in this capitalistic sort of postmodern world. So it's a nice idea to turn off the oil and gas production and stop using plastics. But if we did that, we would, cause untold numbers of deaths and huge environmental damage and so on, because we're not there yet. So I'm thinking about making maximum impact I can. And then you immediately think about raising money from investors. What do they want to see? Recurring revenues. They want to see scalability. So immediately you're thinking, okay, 30 million shipping containers in the world. And then it comes down to this question, why is it possible that we can monitor our pet in the garden, our child on the way to school, our luggage through the airport, our new shoes through the mail to our front door from Amazon or whoever, and then our pizza as it trundles down the road in the pizza delivery truck. But we can't monitor a shipping container full of iPhones across the planet. It simply doesn't make sense. Why is this? And when you start to unpack that, you realize there's lots of complexity. So the first thing is that the device hardware, it needs to stay self-sustained. It needs to be healing. It needs to be power management. It needs to, what actually a big cost is when you put the device onto the asset, just the fitting of it onto an asset is a huge cost to take that asset out of production and to have two people, one person to fix it on and to use the screw to screw it in, and then another guy to pair it to the cloud, etc. May cost $600. And then you consider that the price point from those early devices was maybe $500 per piece anyway, and the shipping container itself was only worth $2,000, and a lot of the time it's carrying scrap paper or scrap metal back to China. So do you really care? So, these were the kinds of issues. And then on the market side, the clients, when we first met the clients in the container space, they were saying to us, well, our customers just simply won't pay more. And that's partly because they'd been sort of in a race to the bottom in terms of pricing to, crush their competitors. Mm-hmm. And also, they're ordering huge vessels, these massive super shipping containers. They're ordering those 5 years earlier, and then there's an economic downturn, and there's oversupply and under demand. So, there was various challenges, but I realized that I wanted to equip these shipping containers and do something that scalable and that impactful. But we would run out of time, so we had to ask ourselves, well, what's similar to a shipping container, but it's got moving parts? And it turns out that a rail car is $40,000-$50,000 dollars or euros to buy. It's got lots of moving parts and it needs to be optimized. So we flipped to rail to continue gaining experience, to win customers, and to stay in the game.
And obviously, you were saying there about time, not enough time. With when you were starting this, your original MVP, did you get it outsourced? How did you approach that?
Yeah, well, to be honest, it's a tricky one because we couldn't just produce it in China. It's extremely precision, quality. We were leveraging our Swissness, so our Swiss precision, our Swiss quality, our Swiss manufacturing as well. So we're working with local partners to manufacture the first prototypes. I mean, the very first prototypes, we built it in-house ourselves on weekends. And, I have a funny story because I flew out to Dubai and met a load of prospect customers. I actually attended GITEX and then a conference and met people who wanted to try our products. Went back to Switzerland to build 30 prototypes and ended up getting arrested as I arrived in the country because I was carrying suspicious hardware. But actually this led us on a path to meeting various customers, and there's quite some fun stories there. But actually, this is kind of the experience that founders need, to be honest, is those learnings, those discoveries where you realize there is value, there is opportunity, and it confirmation that you're actually on the right path.
How do you get that then? So is that by going to obviously these conferences and things like that to see if people scream back, yes, we need it? How else do you get that kind of confirmation?
I think 100 phone calls a day is a good benchmark for the first couple of years. Yeah. Because, obviously you don't end up making 100 calls a day, but, even if you make 20 calls a day, you can pick up the phone and you can ask potential customers whether they've tried something, how they feel about it, what the current culture in their organization is around that topic. What sort of problems keep them up at night, what sort of issues their customers would like to solve, where their risks are. It's lots and lots of open questions of all kinds, what, who, why, how, when, and why is the most valuable, but it's also one of the trickiest to ask. And, you just have to keep plugging away at trying to get to the truth. And, you also speak to different people within your target client's business, and you'll get different answers too. So it's a kind of a relentlessness around questioning. Obviously, lots of events, making presentations on stage, listening to others who've tried similar things. And in the end, if you've got something attractive and interesting, then they will speak. People will open up and be very open, discussions about their use cases, why things failed. Often it's to do with politics. Often, an objection can be something that's not related to the real reason. It can just be maybe you're not speaking to the right person. Maybe there's some embarrassments around the lack of understanding about data. We have cultural issues where we have the old guard that have managed this business with great pride for many years, and then the new generation that are saying, well, it doesn't make sense that you can track your pizza but not a shipping container. So, we've got lots of different topics to deal with, but you've got to be personable, you've got to be open-minded, you have to ask the right questions, ask better questions, listen for hints about where the duty action is, and then dive in on those things, but obviously not cause any offense. So this little thing here is a little chip that's kind of off the shelf. It's actually a Zigbee protocol, so it's a mesh network, IEEE 804.1502 standard mesh network off the shelf. And so that was a MVP, okay? And before we even settled on supply chain, we had this thing and we proved it, and it could do all these impressive things, send its signal 80 kilometers line of sight, and self-healing mesh network, zero maintenance, zero infrastructure, energy harvesting, etc. And we were pretty impressed by this, and we thought, this is going to be a great product, and we get that out to the market. And one of our meetings, we sat down with a connectivity provider, and we're trying to sort of, leverage their network and their contacts to get the first customers. And the guys that we met said, head of IoT said, well, that's not a product in our meeting. And, we were kind of looking a bit puzzled. What does it mean by this? It can do all these great things. What would make it a product? And he said, well, it's easy. It needs a housing, needs a box. So, we came back with that.
Okay.
So it's quite a simple iteration. It's a solar panel on a small plastic housing that we 3D printed with a little sensor on the back. It's more or less the same as this thing, but all of a sudden, everyone can imagine this being something, and you can project your ideas into this. So this is kind of the tool that we used, or that I used, to unlock the imagination of the customer.
I guess that's something that is so important for really any startup, but especially yours there. So it's the process of actually conducting those interviews, getting that feedback, but that real life, more in-depth feedback. How, with that in mind, so how did obviously you said in your previous roles, headhunter, how did you transfer those skills from being a headhunter into this strategic partnership roles in order to get, the juicy bits, what you were saying from them?
Yeah. So as a headhunter, a high level headhunter, so, doing strategic type placements and so on, and technical placements, you're always floating on top of technologies. You're always understanding how technologies fit together. And you're also understanding the big picture in the organization of who the key stakeholders are. You're constantly... actually, in a way, selling a product like software or a device is easier than selling a person, because the device doesn't make choices. It doesn't change its mind. So there's a certain amount of resilience that you get when you've been a headhunter for any length of time. There's also, you get a sense for truth and for unpicking things until you get to the real deal. And then there's the other thing of being able to hire good people and to scale the team quickly, for zero cost. And actually, in the early days, we did everything on an extreme budget. There was really no money for anything. We were just, making it up as we went along. And anyone who joined the team, we pretty much said, well, if you want a corporate job, go elsewhere. This is really nuts about startup. It's going to be exciting, but we can't guarantee you anything really,
With that in mind then, so would you go to, obviously you said Switzerland there, is there anywhere else you would look for the outsourcing? Do you outsource now? Is it something you do now?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, when you say outsourcing, let's just define what we mean by outsourcing. So there's a manufacturing partner who actually makes the devices, and we'll get onto the current versions of the devices in a second. But obviously they're extremely precision devices that we need to have extreme trust. We're actually offering that device some different models, but it's kind of hardware enabled software as a service, and there's different engagement models. So it's possible to buy the device, but it's also possible that we pay for the device. Okay. Anyway, either way, we need that device to be sending its data for the whole lifetime that it was planned for that device. Otherwise, our business model isn't functioning. So, extreme quality around the device, around the security, around not anti-spoofing technologies, and that gives our customer and ourselves the confidence that we need. When we go back to this question of MVP, which bits do you keep in-house purely, and which bits can you let other people do? Where do you let, which, for example, in China, I have to be extremely careful when even my devices go to China, because, I've got to be aware of the fact that there's competitors there trying to do things very similar, cloning type businesses. So, I guess in a way you have to compromise a little bit, but you have to decide which parts you can compromise on. And actually, to be honest, we've got this incredible team here, super nimble, super agile, 30 different nationalities. We have 100 people, we've got 30 nationalities. And, everyone has their own joining story and incredibly committed and have made it their business to understand what our customers need and to develop the products around that. So yes, outsourcing is relevant in some areas. We can outsource certain tasks and we can nearshore things, but we tend to integrate people into very close to the Nexxiot family in order to keep close control, especially as we have constantly evolving needs.
Okay, so you're talking there about your team. That's actually more information there because I've got some kind of outdated information of 21 different countries. So you've increased it even more to 30.
Yeah, it's probably around 28 or something like this at the moment, but it's still anyway. Yeah, especially considering there's less than 100 people still.
Exactly, absolutely. Tell me a little bit about that then, because obviously we were talking there about earlier. We were talking about your skills with being able to hire people, with being able to know honesty, empathy as well, which will be very important. How do you guys, Nexxiot, how do you guys go about recruiting? The market is so difficult at the moment. How do you guys go about recruiting? And let's start with that. How do you go about recruiting? How do you find your developers in the market, which is so saturated?
In the early days, I felt I don't know if you remember those science films about the forming of the planets when you were at school, where you have like a hot ball of rock that's spinning in space and you have asteroids hitting it and kind of it's growing like this with each new impact. It felt a little bit like that in the early days. So, the kind of, I've got a friend who can do that. And then this person turns up who's just perfect for the job. And they, and we love each other from day one and they join and, and this is kind of let's say an iterative culture, so that we're adding to our network and people sort of emerge from our network and they tend to join and they love it. So, we're quite an unusual company in some ways. We've got very little hierarchy. I know lots of people claim that, but we really genuinely do. We also have, a very clear vision about how we want to add value to the world and how we want to preserve, human value. We've got quite authentic purpose, I would say. We want to increase safety and efficiency and sustainability, obviously, but what does this really mean? We have to define it in the new age of digital. These are all very positive. And then now we've got a very strong hiring or talent searching team who are constantly scouring for really amazing, unique people. And, we have kind of a policy where we hire for strength and not for lack of weakness. We also want to enable people to be free to bring the value that they can. So in some cases, people, we don't exactly know how they're going to fit in, but we say, well, come and join and check it out. And then we know that we can use your skills, but you probably know which job you should be doing better than we after a few weeks. We even have people who've left extreme sort of intellectual academic environments and joined us. So, one of our guys worked on CERN data looking for the Higgs boson, and now he's working on big data coming from railcars, which doesn't seem on the surface so sexy, but actually, it creates a lot of value for humanity. So if people are very values driven, then, an organization like ours presents an interesting alternative to big tech, which is already kind of, reached that point of corporate.
Tell me a little bit about, obviously, let's say 30 countries, and plus minus. How do you manage people? How do you manage a team when it's 30 countries all around the globe, different time zones? How do you go about managing that?
So I'd like to say people are pretty self-managing, and they are to a degree, in that, with that size, you can be fairly sort of bottom up in terms of the management. It's more principles, and everybody is fascinated by their own individual task, and they're working together in mini squads with others that they like and care about. So in that sense, it's quite self-managing. Everyone's extremely motivated and prepared to go the extra mile. We're not too heavily distributed. Yes, we're probably spread across, 6 or 7 countries, but with the exception of the US time zone, we're mostly in the same time zone. And I guess also, yeah, it's evolving in terms of how we manage this complexity. We're reaching the next phase of growth and obviously the next phase of sophistication in terms of the products and so on. So we have to iterate and to pivot this too. But until now, it's been fairly straightforward because people are purpose driven, really, to be honest.
Okay, so we're talking about folks, different countries, mainly focused for Europe. Have there been any standout star countries where you found your people from? Has there been anywhere that really surprises you and think, wow, that country really impresses?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, all of the countries that all of the people have, we've got, sort of multiple people from Brazil, multiple people from Switzerland. We've got places like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. These countries are all very impressive as well. Great academic records. People hungry for opportunity, innovation. Switzerland also super impresses, to be honest, because there's a great academic group of establishments here. Maybe one of the challenges for the Swiss is to be that bold and to be that innovative and risk-taking. So in a way, when we bring all these cultures together, we get the best out of all of them. And as long as we can take our uniquenesses as advantages, as long as we can be extremely respectful, we can still, have a laugh and take the mickey out of each other and not be sort of fixated on the kind of this multiculturalism that's taken to the extreme, but actually just enjoy the variety and enjoy the personalities from different places. I think this is one of the things that really makes this such a strong company, to be honest. The commitment from all different cultures and the way that we can interact and respect each other and enjoy each other's company.
Okay, good. Let's go on. Let's move a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about IoT. Yeah. So one of Nexxiot's goal is to enable a 5% reduction in global supply chain of carbon dioxide emissions by increasing cargo transport efficiency and eliminating waste caused by empty runs and inefficient routes. So we know the IoT is impacting the environment, of business, and can significantly reduce carbon emissions by making businesses and the industry more efficient. How are you guys at Nexxiot making this happen? Because you've got there that you're trying to reach this 5% goal. Yeah. Have you reached this goal yet? And how did you make it happen?
Yeah, it's very difficult to actually get fixated on a specific percentage, actually, because there's no precedent. There's no data before we arrived. So, it's a bit of an arbitrary number in some senses, in that you take something that we will be able to work out whether we've been effective in this at some point. But the first thing is to equip the global supply chain assets that don't have power, so non-powered mobile assets, dry shipping containers, tank containers, ISO tank containers, rail cars, to equip those things with devices like the ones that we've shown, and then start gathering the data. But what I do know, or what I can tell you, is that 40% of shipping containers on the road that have been traveling by truck are empty. Okay. So it's a surprising statistic, and it may be less than that now, but there's so much of these asymmetries of flow that now the rail does the long distance very efficiently, about 5 to 7 times more efficiently than a road. But the road is more chosen because the road can do first mile, last mile. So they choose the road for the long journey and the first mile, last mile, whereas it could be if you're able to align the road truck to do first mile, last mile with the rail for doing the big distance, because you've got the data that enables them to be connected, then you can take the best modality for the appropriate trip of the journey or the leg of the journey. Let's take another example. We saw last summer, the biggest spill of plastics in the history of humanity off the coast of Sri Lanka from a vessel that burned down. Now, all the way through the cargo chain, maritime cargo chain, there's something called cargo declaration process, which is a document that's filled in by the cargo owner or the shipper, and they basically fill in the things and they say, yes, this is this substance and it will go to this place and it's safe. Now, one example I've heard from a carrier fairly recently was that in Indonesia, they load charcoal into shipping containers, and they should let that charcoal get down to below 30 degrees centigrade before they load it in. But they're loading it in because they don't want to waste time at 65 degrees, 70 degrees centigrade. It goes onto the vessel, the charcoal rubs together, it's creating dust. Also, it's self-heating because of the friction. It goes up to 80 degrees, suddenly it reaches flash points, there's a fire in that container, and the next container, because of its misdeclared cargo, the next container over contains fertilizer. and it shouldn't contain fertilizer. It should just contain wood pellets or something like this.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, you've got a vessel that's on fire, and all of the cargo, everything's wasted. All of the damage, it becomes a blame game, insurers, etc. That's another example. We saw also a vessel go down on the Atlantic with 4,000 luxury vehicles. That was just 3 months ago. So there's all these events that are happening in the supply chain at the moment. There's no way to stop it from happening. There's no way to intervene if it does happen. And then there's no recourse of action for responsibility and accountability once it did happen.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up with lengthy court cases and lawyers. Now you can see that this is all creating lots of grey energy waste. Also, things are being moved to the wrong place and then they have to be repositioned. And we have empty assets traveling big distances when they could be filled up. So you see all kinds of areas where there's issues with efficiency and sustainability. And then it goes through to the different stakeholders. So the ports, the terminals, the customs, all of these different parties, the freight forwarders, the authorities, they all need a part of that data in order to do a more efficient job. At the moment, just to get coffee from Kenya to Hamburg, it can take up to 200 written documents. So these things are being moved around, faxed around, driven on mopeds, rubber stamped, driven back to the port again. Mm-hmm. It's not acceptable anymore. We're living in a digital age. Mm-hmm. So you can see that actually very quickly we will hit that 5% target from cargo emissions. And then we start to think about the bigger picture. So that might be to protect trade data from monopolies, or it could be to optimize human activity and use of resources on the entire planet by 30%. But in the end, we want to make an impact. So we need to start gathering data. It's difficult to know exactly the quantity of impact you make until you start to gather that data and make sense of it.
Really interesting point there, what you were saying with the 200 piece of paper, 200 stamps that needs to go down, because actually, yeah, it's so archaic in so many different ways, isn't it? That it needs that start in order for it to just go straight up.
Yeah, but you see, that's the weird thing, is that Silicon Valley stopped making hardware, and actually that hardware layer is critical in order to create value, because you're gathering data and making value from that data for different stakeholders. So, people say, oh, the technology's there, it's easy, but actually, no, it's not quite there, because it needs to be built at a price point that makes sense. It needs to be deployed, and then it needs to be maintained, and the data needs to be monitorized.
Let's move on to one of my next questions here, which is, okay, so we're kind of talking about it. How did you go about building your hardware device? How did you even manage this? How did you go first steps of doing this?
Yeah, so in the early team, my co-founder, he was a brilliant technician and extremely sort of innovative, putting things together. And, he was sort of able to put together the rudiments of this device enough to test it and to start communicating it to people who might be partners to build it more professionally. But the truth is that it was pretty much hacked together from existing components, and it wasn't, like the initial hardware that we built was probably over-engineered and too expensive, because most of the time things are. And actually we realized that it's a fairly rudimentary thing, but the important thing is making sure that it's sustainable, that it sustains itself, that it manages its own health, and that also we know that it's got connectivity through different future-proof connectivity protocols. And then once that prototype's sort of emerging, then it changes and iterates. We probably had, since this version, we probably had 350 versions of the hardware. So, obviously the first 150 were still hacked together in-house and 3D printed and so on. But then, once you start to get it into a stable form factor and stable design, then you want to try to, consolidate your components and your BOM, your bill of materials, because this is a risk. So the device kind of, once we're on that track, we had some great nerds on board right from the beginning who loved making hardware, and we still do. They're fascinated by it, and they constantly needing a challenge to keep them interested and to capture their imaginations.
Okay, so we've spoken a little bit about your how IoT can help a supply chain. Yeah, I actually saw a few weeks ago I saw some research when I was looking up at Nexxiot, and a few weeks back you launched your largest ever deployment of IoT hardware devices in the ocean. Tell us a little bit about this.
So it's a long relationship. We started these relationships with the ocean carriers right back when we founded the company, and it was always in our minds to scale it. There's 30 million shipping containers in the world, and 0.05% of them are tracked and monitored, or even less. We've got the refrigerated shipping containers are mainly monitored because they've got power units and they've got a GPS unit inside that. inside that generator set. But still, we basically started those discussions. We've been involved in defining the standards because we were the first, to create this product. We've been involved in all of the governing bodies like the Container Owners Association, the World Shipping Council, the different groups of carriers. And, I remember I was once in a meeting already 5 years ago in a, I think it's the 58th floor in a building in Shanghai. And the whole industry more or less turned around to me and said, well, we've got Nexxiot in the room, and that Nexxiot's going to tell us how we're going to digitize the global supply chain. So over to you. And, you kind of put in this strange situation where you have to start talking and you don't really know what you're going to say, but, you sort of put your ideas out there and people are nodding and taking notes. So you keep going. But I think, to be honest, because of our...
Was it really well received then as well? Was it even more well received now?
I think it was well received then, but that was because we had stakeholders or people who believed in a digital supply chain and saw the digital trend and understood what it meant. And if you don't innovate, then you're going to be, left on the shelf, really, to be honest. So, there were people, and we ended up, obviously finding sort of champions within those organizations who we could support with our ideas that they could then communicate them onwards. Ultimately, it's very difficult getting decisions from the board when boards are generally the older generation, non-digital natives, and they think that their systems and their business, they're proud of it, it's always worked, and they don't have much incentive to change because it can only go wrong. If you're going to retire, and sail off into the sunset on your yacht, in the next few years, and then somebody comes along and says, oh, we're going to change everything that we ever thought was possible about our business, there's not much incentive to do it because it can only go wrong, relative to nothing, which is not going wrong, So there's a conflict there as well. But in the end, we work with quality partners who are looking for a future which is, about providing new services and new capabilities to their market, to their customers. They want to be the leaders of innovation. You have this Gartner's hype cycle. You have the early adopters, and then the chasm of despair, and then the early mainstream. And, obviously getting across that chasm from early adopter to early mainstream is extremely challenging. And you have to make sure that you're able to stay alive during that period. But, in the end, it became an inevitability. And we were obviously first through the door with these ideas. So we were, and also obviously our focus on quality, our Swiss credentials, our empirical multidisciplinary background and team, all of those played into it. But in the end, it comes down to a pretty serious negotiation because it's, obviously it's a huge decision to be the first one. And obviously Hapag-Lloyd, hats off to them. They've really laid a new benchmark down to the market by saying we believe in going full fleet across all of our asset types in order, all of our containers to provide the next level of transparency services, solutions to all the stakeholders that we service.
Because I know time is running out and I don't want to take too much more of your time. So 2 really quick questions there. So you were saying about, obviously you've got these stakeholders, these people that you need to impress, people that you need to convince to take you on. How do you do it if they are these older stakeholders who have always thought one way? How do you convince them to start thinking your way?
It's a bit of a numbers game. You have to find the right people with the right culture and the right mindsets. And I guess, to be honest, we've got to find the challenges that they're facing in their daily business and the things that they want to solve. And, essentially it's about asking the right questions, asking better questions and better questions, and also just building trust and explaining to them your thinking, how the process is going to work and where the weaknesses are, what we are currently, our concerns and what we're working on in order to make the product stronger and more reliable and more secure for them and so on. So I guess in the end, it's a transitional period that you have to build a relationship, and that's critical.
Okay, so the last question, which I want to know from you. So from your years of experience, from your experience of building Nexxiot, what is the advice you would give to our other tech founders, other startup founders as well, which you wish you knew at the beginning, which you know now? What would be that advice?
So it's something that I said earlier. It's that don't get fixated on specific outcome, because, if you're asking broad questions, it may be that maybe we'd have just been decided at the beginning that we're going to sell devices. We're just going to sell devices, sell hardware. Then we would have missed out on all of the value that's created in process the data and created digital services, and then all of the different stakeholders that now sort of come to the table across the business. So, you think that it's maybe about optimization. If you got fixated on optimization, then you'd miss out on the cargo services and what that visibility means to the cargo owner, for example, because he doesn't care about optimizing the asset fleet. He cares about when his cargo is going to arrive. So it's kind of being able to go, 50,000 feet and then drill down into details and then go back up again and then drill down again to understand the relationships and the gaps. That's maybe one thing. The other thing is, which we hear often, is don't let perfect get in the way of great. You can be fastidious about not wanting to show something, but actually this definitely wasn't perfect. But it set us on the path because it gave us a tool to ask the right questions. So, that's that. And I guess, the power of understanding what an MVP can be and learning to iterate. Because every time we release a new product, which is, a software product essentially now based on our data, we have to define that process with our customers and integrate their domain knowledge, because we're not the experts in all of the fine detail around workshops in the rail industry. It's a dirty old metal industrial. It's different to an ultra slick, fast, high-tech company. But actually, that's where most of the fun is, when you join those things together, because you suddenly start to see new ways of doing things. And then you have that moment where the eyes light up on the domain side. Somebody who's not interested in digital suddenly says, I can't believe this is now possible. This is an answer to all my dreams. So, this is the thrill of the chase, I guess. And I guess, to realize how long it takes to make a really significant impact, and to be prepared for the length of time and the energy that's going to need to take the energy from one thing and to roll into the next thing. So you're not going up and down, but you keep at that high level of energy through the whole process. When I tell people, if I at the beginning, we're going to digitize the global supply chain, everyone would just laugh at you and tell you have no chance, But here we are, we're doing it. It's been a long journey, and there's been, many thousands of moments where everything could have gone completely broken because we made the wrong choice. But somehow, you need some luck. But you have to keep giving yourself that look by keeping the same mindset and actually being consistent.
It's one of those things I've heard before. Someone said to someone, a very, very rich person, can't remember who, but they said, what is your secret to success? Is it luck? And they said, well, the more I work, the luckier I seem to get. So, it's that kind of idea. And, you've got to start somewhere. You start.
One last quote on the same topic, Seneca, Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, he said, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And, the world is changing, so be prepared for that change and try to think ahead and imagine how the world's going to look in 6 months' time, in 2 years' time, in 8 years' time, in 30 years' time, and actually make the groundwork for the future that we don't yet know.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to press the thumbs up button below. Also, subscribe to our channel to make sure you don't miss out on any future content coming your way in the near future. Also, I really want to know your opinion about this episode, so be sure to leave a comment down below in the comment section. Okay guys, that's all for now. See you soon.